The Apostle Paul opens verse number 26 with something that we really need to think about. This is what he says. Again, 1 Corinthians, the 14th chapter, verse number 26. What is the outcome? When we look at our church services, we need to analyze. We need to ask ourselves, what's the outcome, brother? What is the outcome in our church? Are we a church that's causing so much confusion that there is no edification, there is no confrontation of the ungifted and of the unbeliever? Are we a church that has no operation in the supernatural whatsoever? And at the end of the service, when everything is done, the unbeliever walks out and they're still an unbeliever. The ungifted walk out and they still are not educated in the use of the gifts. What is the outcome, brethren? And then he goes on and he gives more instruction to the church. And he says, when you assemble. He's not giving us instruction into our personal private life. He's already done that and talking about praying in the Spirit. But he's talking now about the assembly of the church. He says then, when you assemble, what's it look like? What should it look like when you assemble? And then he goes on and he says, one has a psalm. Let me ask you a question. When you go to church, what do you bring to church? Besides your tithe and offering, hopefully you're doing that. But what do you bring to church? What do you bring into the assembly? Do you have freedom in the assembly to do what you feel God has given you to do? That's a good question. And it's a question that's vital to every church, every assembly. You know, if the greeter at the door would ask every believer that walked in the building, what did you bring today? What did you bring? Did you bring a psalm? Now, what's a psalm? A psalm is literally in the Greek language, it means to touch a harp. In other words, it means to play a harp. Now, personally, I believe that there are no harps in heaven. I believe there's only Les Pauls in heaven. But a harp was a stringed instrument. And literally this word in its very beginning in the Greek language means to touch or to play a stringed instrument. But then this word morphed as it continued to be used, and it morphed into this thing of a song of praise, a song meant to be sung. When you go to church, do you have a song in your heart? Do you have something that you would like to sing? Now, for me, I don't sing in public. Now, I sing in a chorus of people, but I don't sing solos. Why? Because everybody would leave if I sang a solo. So, to each one. In other words, to some of these people, you need to come with a psalm. Then he goes on and has a teaching. Now, that's my cup of tea right there. That's what I like to do. Bring a teaching. Bring a teaching. What are you bringing to church? Are you bringing a psalm? Are you bringing a teaching? This word teaching, it basically means to teach. Are you given the freedom in your church to stand up and say, hey, this is what the Lord showed me? Maybe it's in a Sunday school class. Maybe it's in a small group setting. But are you coming with something to give? That's what really the Apostle Paul is talking about. But he says a teaching. The next thing he says, and has a revelation. It has a revelation. Did God show you something? Did God reveal something to you? Are you coming to church saying, you know what? I would like to give this revelation. By the way, let me just say this. I am not talking about some kind of disorderly service. I'm talking about a service that is moved by the Holy Spirit as the leadership of that church gives it freedom. Do you have a revelation? Maybe you need to go up to the pastor and say, Pastor, this is what God showed me this week in my devotion. Do you have a revelation? Are you bringing something to the church? The next thing, do you have a tongue? Now, again, realize that in a public service, a tongue always needs to be translated or needs an interpreter. Not translation, but an interpreter. There's a difference. A tongue. Do you have a tongue? And the next thing that he says is, and has interpretation. I don't believe there should be a comma between tongue and has an interpretation. I think it shouldn't say, do you have a tongue and have an interpretation? In other words, are you going to fulfill all that's needed to give a tongue in an unknown language in this service? And then he closes verse number 26 with these words, let all things be done for edification. That's a big statement. Let everything, what? A psalm, a teaching, a revelation, a tongue, interpretation. Let everything that happens in the church be done for the building up of the body, for edification. The word edification means to build up. Let me ask you a question. When you go to church, do you feel built up? Why? Why do you feel built up? Is it from the teaching of the pastor or from a teaching of a person that's gifted to teach? Is it from someone getting up and singing a song? Is it from a tongue and interpretation? Is it from someone sharing a revelation? Everything needs to be done for edification. And then verse number 27, if anyone speaks in a tongue, it should be by 2 or 3 at the most, each in turn, and one must interpret. What's Paul doing? He's saying, you know what, if tongues, then there has to be an interpretation, and there should not be more than 2 or 3 tongues in a service. He's giving us instruction. Now he goes on in verse number 28. If there is no interpreter, and again, this is something that has to take place. If there is no interpreter, he must keep silent in the church. Where is he supposed to keep silent? In the assembly of the church. In other words, it is improper for a person to speak in an unknown language, in a tongue, in a church service without the presence of someone gifted to interpret. It is out of order. And then it says, let him speak to himself and to God. Let him just find a private place where he can just speak to himself and to God. Thank you for watching us. Join us again next week as we continue our study in the book of 1 Corinthians.